As a story narrator, I have my own YouTube channel in my native language, Hmong. Most of the stories on this channel are translated into English from my other channel. Storytelling has always been a vital part of our culture and tradition. I created this channel to share our stories in English, while still being influenced by our culture, traditions, and beliefs. I'll do my best to tell these stories in a way that my English-speaking audience can understand. This first story is a personal account of a scary encounter I had while fishing late at night with my brothers. Enjoy. Story number 1. At the beginning of April 2024, I uploaded a scary stories video about the 2 lakes in Los Banos, where many people go to fish for catfish and stripers. The bigger lake is called San Luis Reservoir, and the little lake is called O'Neill Forebay. I've been fishing there at O'Neill Forebay for the past 2 years. I remember that after uploading the scary fishing stories video about Lake O'Neill Forebay, I went fishing under the bridge at that lake that same week. While fishing, I caught something unusual. As I reeled it in, I noticed it was a strange item, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I just unhooked it and left it there in the water. On April 17th, I returned to the same spot with my 2 older brothers. The water level was lower, so I was able to see the item I had caught the week before. It turned out to be a broken headlight, probably from an accident that had occurred on the bridge above. The highway that runs through there is notorious for fatal accidents. The area is called Bloody Alley for a reason. As we fished, I spotted a rock with some dried meat and sticky rice on it, an offering to the spirits from fellow Hmong fishermen. I pointed it out to my brother, saying it aloud. For those who aren't familiar, the Hmong have a tradition when visiting bodies of water or forests. When they eat, they place some food on a rock or tree stump as an offering to the spirits of the area. This gesture is meant to make peace with the spirits and to ask for protection and good luck. It was a good day for fishing. The weather was a perfect 82 degrees. As the sun began to set, we moved away from the bridge and started catching a few stripers in the 21-22 inch range. But as night fell, the fish stopped biting altogether. We had a few nibbles here and there, and sometimes it felt like a fish was pulling the line, but when we set the hook, there was nothing on the other end. We reeled in the lines only to find the bait still there. When it got too dark, I took out my battery lantern so we could see better. My brother had another nibble, but again, there was nothing. He decided to replace the old bait with a new one, while I held the lantern up for him. After he finished, I lowered the lantern and started walking back to my spot, swinging the lantern back and forth. As I passed by, my elbow nearly brushed against a little girl with dirty brown hair and a brown dress standing at the water's edge. She looked to be around 3 years old. I quickly turned back with the lantern to get a better look, but there was no one there. I believe in ghosts and spirits, but I've never seen one so clearly and so close before. I immediately told my brothers we needed to leave. I asked them not to question me and promised to explain once we were away from the lake. We drove home, and I told them about what happened. They said they hadn't seen or heard anything strange while we were there. Despite this eerie experience, we're still planning to go fishing and camp there. Story number 2. I love to go fishing. Even as an Amazon delivery driver, if I have time, I like to stop by a lake or river and toss in a few casts. It's always catch and release for me. When I'm at home, all I can think about is fishing. My mind is always at the lake or river. Because of this constant passion, there are times when I go fishing alone during the weekdays. Usually, I'd go with a group. Back in 2008, there was a river I loved to fish, especially for crappie at dusk. The best time was around 9 p.m., as crappie usually bite from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. during May. I remember getting off work and driving straight to this river. The past week had been rainy, so when I arrived, I noticed the river was still swollen with some areas flooded. It's usually harder to find fish during a flood because they tend to move to different spots. As I walked around the river, some areas were flooded, so I had to venture into some tall bushes I wasn't familiar with. I came across a field with tall bushes and saw a street sign in the middle of it that read, "Please turn on your headlights." Maybe there used to be a road there or something. I continued walking through the tall bushes, and the ground was wet, so I could hear my footsteps in the mud. At one point, I stepped into a muddy area where my foot sank all the way up to my right knee. It felt like I was stepping on old sticks that were cracking. I pulled my foot out and kept walking. Then I started hearing what sounded like someone else walking around, matching my movements. It sounded like a two-legged animal, but I couldn't think of any two-legged creatures that would be out there besides a person. It was eerie, as if something was mimicking me. I stopped to see if I could still hear the footsteps, and when I did, they stopped too. I lifted my right leg and stomped twice on the mud. Then I heard the same stomping sound echo back. I took out my flashlight and shone it around, but I didn't see anyone. During this time, a strong feeling kept telling me to go home. The urge grew stronger with every step I took toward the river. It felt like a warning that something bad was going to happen, but I kept walking until I was out of the bushy area. I found a nice spot to set up my chair, smoke, and fish. I had one rod for carp and another for crappies. As I sat there smoking and sipping on a Bud Light, I heard my friend Buddha's voice behind me say, "Hey, I didn't think you were coming." It was getting dark, so I turned around to look, but there was no one there, just tall bushes and, to my right, the flooded river. I called out, "Buddha, is that you?" But there was only silence. There were no fish biting, and the river was calm with no waves. I could hear footsteps in the mud behind the tall bushes. I shone my flashlight in that direction, but saw nothing. As I turned back to look at my fishing rod, I caught a glimpse of a light flashing from the bushes. When I turned to look, the light went out. I got up with my flashlight and started walking toward the bushes, but then the rod for the carp started going crazy, the bells ringing. I ran back and yanked the rod, but there was nothing on the line. The cereal bait I used for carp was still on the hook. Then I heard laughter, sounding like Buddha, coming from behind the bushes. I called out for him to stop messing around. Buddha and I used to fish that river a lot, so I thought he had seen my car and knew I was there fishing. I took out my flip phone and called him. When he answered, my body froze and hairs sticking up. On the phone, I could hear the background noise of a basketball game on TV. He said he was at home. I believed him, realizing there was something in the area mimicking his voice to scare me. I told Buddha I'd call him back and quickly gathered my things. Instead of going back through the tall bushes, I walked through the flooded area, which was about waist deep, got to my car, and drove home. I've read a lot about spirits that mimic friends or family members. I never thought I'd encounter such a spirit at one of my favorite fishing spots. In all my fishing experiences, that's the only time something truly scared me out on the river. A few days later, while driving to work, I felt a pain in my chest. It wasn't too bad, maybe a 3 or 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. I drove to the office, and as I was helping load things into the trucks, the pain increased to about a 7 or 8. My boss drove me to the hospital. At the hospital, they took my blood and did a chest scan. They didn't find anything and sent me home. The chest pain continued on and off for about a week. I told my father, who then informed my uncle, a medium, to look into it. After my uncle did some spiritual looking into the problem, he called and asked if I had stepped on a grave. I said I hadn't. A few days later, as the pain persisted, my uncle looked into it again. He asked me to think hard. Had I gone somewhere and stepped on an old grave? According to him, he saw a vision of a woman who was unhappy because I had stepped on her chest while she was sleeping. That's when I remembered the fishing trip where I stepped into a hole and felt like I broke some sticks. My uncle suggested that might have been it. He thought maybe those weren't sticks, but a rib cage. Once my uncle identified the problem, he said to give it 3 days. If the chest pain went away, he would perform an offering ritual to the spirit. After 3 days, the pain was gone. My uncle came over that weekend and performed the ritual. Since then, I haven't had any problems. I never knew there was an old shallow grave in that area where I fish. Story number 3. I live in Modesto, and if you drive south on the highway towards Livermore, you'll come across a river where a lot of people fish during the summer days. The river flows fairly quickly, but there are some areas where the water slows down, making them better for fishing. However, these spots are farther along the river, so most people don't venture that far. The area has a bit of a rough feel to it, with signs riddled with bullet holes, but it's one of my favorite places to fish for bass and striper. One summer, I remember fishing a bit farther down the river in a spot with a lot of vegetation along the riverbank. There were tall grasses and bushes behind me, and I had already caught my limit of 2 stripers, each 24 and 26 inches long. That spot became my new favorite because it was far from everyone else. As I waited for more fish to bite, I noticed the tall grasses and bushes behind me rustling and making a lot of noise, as if an animal were moving through them. It was a calm night with no wind, yet the commotion behind me continued. I stood up and shined my flashlight at the area, and the noise stopped. I stayed there for a bit longer, but the rustling resumed. Figuring it was just some animals, I decided to pack up and leave. Not long after, I ran out of stripers to eat at home, so I returned to the same spot one evening at sunset. As the sun went down, I caught a good-sized channel catfish, so I netted it and tied it to a string to keep it in the water. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a lady screaming and running toward my location. At first, I thought it might be a fox or a coyote, but as the sound grew closer and louder, it distinctly resembled a human scream. The noise headed straight for the tall bushes and grasses, then stopped abruptly. The rustling in the vegetation started again, just like before. I threw a rock into the bushes, and the commotion ceased. The sound had been too human-like to dismiss as an animal. As I stood there, unsettling thoughts crept into my mind. What if, in the past, a woman had been chased into those bushes, assaulted, and killed? Feeling increasingly frightened, I grabbed my gear and the catfish and left. The scream had sounded too much like a human to ignore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible might have happened there. Since then, I haven't gone back to that fishing spot. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.